get a lot of EU money potential. But in June the election came, and in May last year he evicted Roma from the Krajka settlement of his city, in a city where 2% of the population is Roma. When my colleague came and he heard this 2%, he couldn't believe this is the issue that Myanmar cannot solve. It could solve, but he got 92% on the basis of this act, and that is really the core of the issue. I think I'd rather stop here because there are a few things which would need more time, such as desegregation. It's a very intricate issue of segregation, desegregation, and there is a large number of new Roma leaders who are not so gung-ho on desegregation, who say, look, if the governments and if the majorities don't want us to be integrated, maybe we should concentrate on better schools rather than desegregated schools. It's a huge it's a subject of huge controversy within the Roma community as well as the development community. Again, very intricate subject, needs a lot of consideration. I just want to say that this conference has been really a very solemn but very good celebration of the International Roma Day. Undoubtedly, we will have to continue to push and approach the issue from the perspective of demanding rights and from the perspective of talking to the authorities on all the three levels that I have mentioned. And it's a precarious situation, so it needs all your help, and I'm very grateful that you are organizing this conference, Jennifer. Thank you, and Magda.
Thank you very much. Because of my merciless time management, the courteous discipline of the panelists, and a grant of some extra time from the chair of this entire program, we now do have a few minutes for questions and responses. I will not ask the three of you to talk among each other because that will then use up some time, and I think there may be some disagreements you have among each other, but there may not be. So what I would like to do is take 2 questions at a time, real questions, no comments, real questions, and if you could direct it at one or the other panelists, or if you're not sure, then just say you're not sure, okay? So, sir, yes.
Thank you. Please excuse my voice. I'm a high school teacher, but I'm also an American Rom. And one of the things that I'm noticing is that some of the students in my district who are Rom are calling themselves Greek right now. And one of the big things is when I start to talk to them, they have a distrust of Kazakhano culture. And I'm noticing that a gentleman in my community as well, who is now in a university here in Boston for criminal justice, his professor just got finished talking about gypsy crimes as a unit. What's being done to kind of restore trust? There seems to be this kind of us-them mentality that I'm noticing, especially with individuals in my community, that you just don't talk about who we are.
Could you just say where you're from? What community?
I'm from Weymouth.
Weymouth,
Yeah,
okay,
right
Weymouth,
down.
Massachusetts.
We're about 15-minute drive outside of Boston.
Thank you. Sir, you as well. Please, I neglected, could you just say your name and where you're from?
My name's Liam Leahy, and I'm from Boston area. I had a question for the panel, since this is a violence panel. I was wondering if you guys could talk and address the Hungarian, or any updates you had on the Hungarian serial killer case, and the why the government was covering up that, and if there's any new light or developments on that.
Okay, so 2 questions, both from Americans who are concerned about growing us-them polarities in the United States and how to address that. You probably have some good advice for us. And then a question on serial killer in Hungary, and you may or may not want to define it in that mode, but certainly.
I can answer, no problem. I mean, it's very easy, no updates. There is no prosecution done. Basically, the trial is still pending, so there's no outcome at this point.
So there's a case pending. There is actually going to be a trial and there's no outcome?
Well, look, there are a number of cases from 2008, 2009, which took part.
In Hungary?
Yes.
So are you
Some of them are still pending, so there is no yet from 2009 until
Yes.
now, there is no final decision on the perpetrators, against the perpetrators.
So there are a series of killings, and the question is who has been doing them and how many people have been doing them? Not resolved, but being looked at carefully.
It's a court
Yeah.
process, right?
the big section of evidence, which is the big concern.
Okay, let's move on. So
Yeah.
the us-them issues.
About trust, yeah, policing minorities. I mean, there are a lot of examples in Central Eastern European countries. One which was started, for example, by my colleagues from Romani Chris and by me while I was working with Romani Chris was to basically train police officers. So we were part of a series of trainings working with police officers. We started with low-ranking officers and up to the highest-ranking police officers in Romania. That was a program which took place and it was implemented during several number of years. In Romania now, as in Hungary, for example, there's a policy on the government to employ Roma as police officers. So this is a kind of a best practice. But still there is a lot of work to do because training alone is not enough. You know, it is a step, but it's not enough.
I know that both of you also would like to comment. So Professor Guy and then Professor Mijek.
Well, this is just a comment. It's ironic that during the communist period, one of the main ways of Roma social mobility was to join the police and the army. And in the army in particular, they did national service. They were alongside non-Roma, and this was a help. And so this is completely gone. But the Czech Republic now trains police officers as well, Roma police officers. So.
I mean, just one thing, that one of the big differences, obviously, of the many, that these countries, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, have a Romani population between 7 and 10% of the whole population. So if you have that, and you heard all the other statistics also from the director of the Agency of Fundamental Rights, it's just that it requires actions, and one of the actions is indeed the police officers. But there are many other differences between the United States and these countries. One, and I don't know how Professor Greenberg thinks about it. For me, it's a fundamental difference. Not in your case, but when we think about the African Americans and Indians, the Indians never come up in the American discussions, but it seems to me a much more relevant issue than the African Americans. Is the issue of rule of law. You can legislate what the European Union demands, but then how much of it will be implemented, it depends on the rule of law culture of the country. How much you can bribe yourself out of the law, how much to start with the law is taken seriously, or as a starting point of an illegal bargain, basically. It's very important. I don't know, it would be very interesting to know your view of how much relevance it has to our long-term integrational efforts.
Professor Greenberg, could you take a moment to think about that? Because that's a question to you. And could we now take 2 more questions from the floor? Yes, sir. You raised your hand.
Thank you very much. Just a brief question. When I look at our surveys...
For those who came late, could you introduce yourself?
Sorry.
Who came very late, could you introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Morten Kjærum. I'm director of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency in Vienna. From our surveys on hate crime, the EU has a lot of focus on hate crime entire 2013. So it's really a year to address it. When we look at our surveys, whether it's LGBT, whether it's Roma, whether it's ethnic minorities, and we ask those that you also referred to, those who have been assaulted, violently attacked, hate crime victims, how would you describe the perpetrator? what we are seeing out of that, when we read it horizontally, is a totally normal European. Of course, we have the incidents from Hungary with the Jobbik and the paramilitary groups. We have the Golden Dawn in Greece. But what really worries me is the way that the victims describe an ordinary European as the perpetrator. I don't know how that looks from your point of view, from your research, because then I think we have a very big problem.
Yes, if it's ordinary people, that is the situation that's volatile. There was a hand up here before the panel responds. Somebody had their hand up. There was a young woman. Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Selene Klitsch. I actually work for Fourth Nail Productions with George. Just a brief overview. As everyone should know, Holocaust studies is something that's required in schools. I've gone to school in California, Austin, Texas, and I went to college in New York. I took a Holocaust studies program there, and when I was taking that class, when we actually discussed the Holocaust, Roma weren't even really mentioned. It was all mostly about Jewish, Holocaust, and then it was kind of a grouping of also blacks, gypsies, and gays. And I was just wondering if there was anything that's going to be done in the school districts to start educating children about like the past and present violence, because people really don't know, honestly, and I just think that that's something that's, a little bit important, no big deal, so, yeah.
Two great questions, and I think we're going to have to hold there now. There'll be time in the reception to talk with people further, but these two great questions, and whoever would like to respond to one or both of them, please raise your hand. So, Professor Guy, would you like to address?
Well, certainly, it was very disturbing to see surveys that show that education makes no difference whatsoever. So if people are relatively well educated, they are just as prejudiced and just as likely to do something as relative. So it goes against the stereotype of, these are just poor, working class kids. It's not like that at all. It's all the way through the society.
Mm-hmm. So you are underscoring the common people. Do you want to speak about the ways in which Holocaust studies have been developed? In terms of the Czech Republic, for example, they've been dragging their feet for years. First of all, they didn't want to admit that Czech guards were involved in the camps that sent people to the concentration camps. And then one of these camps, Lety, afterwards was developed into a pig farm. And there was a plan to put a memorial up there and demolish the pig farm because this was seen as demeaning. And there's been a lot of resistance to that. And also the right-wing parties have been demonstrating there, saying we don't want a memorial. We could use this money for a hospital or something like that. So there's been a complete resistance to acknowledging this all the way through. Thank you.
The ordinary Czechs are actually involved in this, complicit in sending people to the camps.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Martin, to your question, it resonates with what Professor Guy says. I am absolutely sure, whatever the surveys show, there is a huge gap between post-communist parts of Europe and the rest when it comes to respecting human dignity. Those of us who come from those countries know what I'm talking about. It appears when you go to the shop, when you talk to the taxi driver in workplace. It's a very fundamental legacy of our communist past that we have to grow out of, but it is with us. It doesn't mean that the French society will not be prejudiced, or the Danish society would not have prejudices, but it's really a fundamental barrier that when you go over the Hungarian-Austrian border, you start feeling the difference. It is there, and we have to admit and we have to work on it. Unfortunately, it really, as one of the panelists said earlier, it also depends, or maybe you or one of the others, that it does require leadership. And leadership in very short supply when you know, a politician is very opportunistic and wants to just concentrate on the next election, which happens. And in that respect, indeed, what you are saying is true, that low education and high education doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. And when it comes to the schools, what I would like to point out is that admitting the Roma Holocaust is relatively new. It starts gaining a momentum, but it's still very, very weak. And for instance, in my country, but because this is overall, the Roma intelligentsia is really starting to, and there was a wonderful celebration this year in Budapest with a concert, but it's there. From there to get to the school books, in a country which, quite cynically, if I have to be honest, says, okay, we cannot leash out at the Jews, but who will protect the Roma? So there is a much more uncivilized talk about the Roma in my country, for sure. Also in the media. You mentioned the media. There is, again, a fundamental difference. Mainstream media in any of the West European countries is basically anti-discriminatory. In our countries, the mainstream media is fundamentally discriminatory. We have to, it is there. Who lives in these countries knows what I'm talking about. We have to get through this, and it's not easy, and it's not going to be automatic. But to get Hungarian teachers teach about Roma Holocaust, it will take a long time.
Thank you for your candor and explanation. Desi, could you have the last word and make it fairly brief, please? Because now we have gone over the permission I got from Jackie Baba.
I will just add a few
Oh,
words.
and then I knew there was another anxiety I had, Professor Greenberg. So Desi, please, no, but to keep on the conversation here about Holocaust studies, Roma, and the common, ordinary person. Your views.
I would only say that if you speak about hate crime, what is missing in Europe in general is basically a collection of data that we don't have that, and in particularly if you look on the Roma victims, we don't see the profile of the Roma victims, and as well, what is striking is that every time when a Roma commits a crime, that's all over, but every time when a Roma is a victim, is nowhere. So that's, first of all, is the media. Secondly, police, it reports more or less the same. Yeah. So, I mean, in Central Eastern European countries for a while, there was even a practice where the police was releasing statistics on perpetrators on ethnic ground only when it was about Roma, which is discriminatory and a facet, of course. So I would say that at this moment we lack data on the profile of both victims and perpetrators. So it's really difficult to assess, to see exactly what is the profile of the perpetrator which commits crimes against Roma.
Of course, this is a lawyer's answer because what he had was data. So you're talking about proof as opposed to inferred
one
trends.
Way or another. Yes, one way or
okay.
another.
No, I was just wondering about the police chief in Miskolc, his statements.
While you two are talking.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Could I
But
ask
on
Professor?
the Holocaust, I
Yes,
would
you-
only like
Yeah.
to say that I think that there's a lack of an awareness generally in Europe about the Roma Holocaust as for example to other groups. I mean, in Europe there is lack of awareness that other groups as just as the Jehovah's Witnesses, that they were part of the Holocaust, So I think generally Europe is only now starting to acknowledge, as Kalman said, that Roma were also part of Holocaust. Even though there is a very nice publication which was done by the Council of Europe on the Holocaust, and also, for example, in Romania it starts to be acknowledged. There's a publication in this regard. OSCE has basically funded a study on this.
Thank you. And we will look for that because I'm not familiar with the Council of Europe report, so that's great. Thank you. Professor Greenberg, and then we'll come back and thank our panel. So the Native Americans and the extent to which the Roma situation is parallel.
Was what the question to you was, but I have an observation that may be at least interesting. not long after the Brown case was decided, I was approached by Native American groups and by Mexican American groups. Could I give them some advice in setting up organizations for themselves that could try to accomplish what we had done in the Brown case? And with the Mexican Americans, it was highly successful. The Mexican American Legal Defense Fund is a large and thriving and an effective organization. With the Native Americans, it was completely unsuccessful. There are a number of Native American organizations. They're not very influential. They haven't joined together in anything. And the differences, I think, are relevant to the Roma situation. The Mexican Americans dealt with a single language, a single location, a single type of discrimination. The Native Americans were disparate tribes, each one speaking different language, all separate, engaged in rivalries with one another. To some extent, resembling the Roma situation. And
Yeah.
I think that indicates maybe some sort of path to go to find enough commonalities that will be appreciated and acted upon by Romas, so they will be resemble more the Mexican situation than the Native American situation.
Thank you. That's a very important observation. And Common, thank you for asking him that question. So we now have this response. Thank you, the three of you, for being extremely precise, terse, provocative, and profound on a very short time leash. And thank you to the audience as well for being so patient and asking such great questions. And we'll now bring this panel to a close with great thanks to all.
I think at this point, all of us are probably ready for music and refreshments, but we have a very short final panel, which Professor Sen would call a 0+, probably. Final concluding remarks. So let me immediately, ask our concluding remarker, so to speak, Erika Schlager to come and join me here. So she's going to just make a few concluding comments, and then I will very briefly just give a few pointers for the way forward. So Ms. Schlager is the Council for International Laws for the U.S. Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, also known as the Helsinki Commission, which is, as probably many of you know, an advisory body within the U.S. system that monitors compliance with Helsinki Final Act and looks at the work of the various organizations of the OSCE. Ms. Schlager works with both the Helsinki Commission and with the State Department on a range of other matters related to OSCE. So she has a broad focus and a broad purview, and one of the elements of that focus and that purview are human rights issues related to the Roma. So we are delighted to have her with us. So Erika, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I want to start by saying how incredibly pleased I have been to be here today. It has been a privilege to be with panelists who have brought so much insight to a field that I work on all the time, and it has been incredibly enlightening for me. So I'm very grateful to that. Also very grateful to the FXB Center, the Marinda Humanities Center, the OSCE, the Center for European Studies, and most of all, Magda. Outstanding job. We're all very grateful. I do want to just say a couple of things. At the end of a conference like this, I think sometimes it is said that everything has been said. And I think certainly we've had a very broad survey of the challenges that Roma face realizing their rights. But while a great deal has been said, there is much more to be done. It needs to be done faster and better. There is no time to waste. And so I hope after listening to today's presentations, people would leave with a sense of urgency and not complacency. Now, the goal of this conference, or at least one of the goals as I understand it, was to put Romani issues on the academic and policy agenda. And I think that there are a couple of challenges that we might sense after listening to today's presentations. First of all, that among the policy issues, there are so many competing issues. There's housing, there's education, there's segregation, there's health issues. And so the question is, what can cut through the Gordian knot if you have to pick a priority? Well, I guess the answer after today would be, we have to do everything, and we have to do it all at once. There is more to be done, and it has to be done better and faster. Now, the other theme that we heard, especially late in the day, was the problem of the violence. And that really gets to the question of crisis management or addressing crises. So we find that as we're looking at the policy agenda, time and time and time again, the policy agenda, especially the longer-term policy agenda, gets unpackaged and broken apart because we're dealing with the crisis agenda. On the plane on the way up here, I was trying to remember the last time I saw Marian Mandaki, and I came to the conclusion that